So welcome to the October 2020 virtual DevOps for Defense meetup. This month I wanted to talk about the economics of DevOps for Defense. So since it is election season, I went back and pulled out one of the old tropes. It's the economy, stupid. As always, the information there below is where you can find all of the material, and it's will be published as open source on our GitHub. So hopefully there's something useful in here for everybody. And as always, thanks to Tech Systems for their sponsorship. Code of conduct is pretty simple. This is obviously an unclassified session, so no dirty words. Please treat each other with respect and professionalism. Don't talk about your secret sauce in your private business, but do talk about experiences and needs and desires and what anybody can do to help you improve. Share your thoughts and learn. And since we're now virtual, as we go through the content, I do ask people to mute yourself while others are speaking, but I do strongly encourage participation, and so feel free to interrupt or add to the conversation as we kind of go through the material. I think it helps make the virtual sessions a little bit more interesting and engaging. So I should also add, I am recording the Zoom for YouTube. So if you don't want to be recorded and part of that YouTube publishing, I simply ask that you remain muted. So one announcement, if you aren't aware, in week after next is the DevOps Enterprise Summit. Normally this is in Las Vegas. Because of COVID this year, it's going virtual. I've had the benefit of going the last 3 or 4 years, and it's outstanding session in person. I don't know what to expect from the virtual summit. What I do know is it's a heck of a lot cheaper than usual, and you don't have to travel. And I've been in contact with Gene Kim's team, and they've provided me a code for 50% off. If you or anyone on your team would like to take advantage of that and has the ability, Google it. You can find DevOps Enterprise Summit, and if you think you're interested, just shoot me an email and I'll share with you the 50% off code. So the real question to answer is, why all the fuss about DevOps? And I think from the title of the pitch, you're going to recognize, this is really about the economics of the matter. It's about what we see shaping our global economy. And anytime something shapes global economy, it gets a lot of interest. And after 5 to 10 years, it even starts impacting the defense industry. And what's interesting right now in the adoption of this that I see in our industry is we're still in the mindset that this is a software thing. I see a lot of folks who come in and say, oh, that's a software thing, it doesn't apply to me. That's not true. It's an economic thing, and it applies to everything we do. But people don't like change, and so they like to compartmentalize it. You have to recognize that DevOps really originated not in software, the way people like to say, but it really originated in industrial engineering and manufacturing. This comes out of, fundamentally, out of the work of people like Goldratt, people like Deming, who helped rebuild industry after World War II. And it really started to manifest in the automotive industry and how they build and ship product. And now you see elements of it in everything from, making Coca-Cola to, if you watched any of the Tesla battery day, you started to see elements of it in how, Tesla is going to build and manufacture their battery cells going forward. And you'll notice things like the principles of flow that really apply across the board, irrespective of your industry. It's about making sure that the creation and delivery of your product is seamless, and you eliminate delays in that cycle. The thing that hit me on Tesla was how they were building a process where, just like, you know, if you're old like me, you remember Laverne and Shirley, and you have the beer bottles crossing the line continuously. They do that with the batteries now, and the materials that go into the line never stop moving until you have a finished battery that comes out the back end. You know, the challenge is, how do we look at the flow of our systems and the value that we're producing and apply those principles to it, so that we're creating higher quality products and doing it in, you know, more responsibly and more affordably than ever. And so I hope that as we go through this, you start to recognize that if we apply that's a software thing to the ideas of DevOps, that it's really going to limit us in our ability to achieve the benefits and the positive outcomes that our customers and our warfighters really expect. So you got to start with looking at the economy, and you got to look at, so how have things actually changed? And so I just went back and took a 20-year swath of time. In 1999, look at the top companies in the world, and they're by market capitalization. Clearly, you've got Microsoft up there. You know, this was in their full swing monopoly days. They were leading everybody. But then you get down, and it's all about General Electric and Exxon and Royal Dutch Shell. You've got pharma companies in there. You've got Intel and Coca-Cola. You know, these were the companies that were big time, were leading the market globally in 1998. When you fast forward 20 years, look at what's changed in that economic landscape. Now it's, you know, companies that came out of nowhere, some of them that were barely even created back in 1998. You got Apples, the Amazons, the Googles. Microsoft is obviously still there. Facebook, Tencent's a Chinese internet conglomerate. They build internet services. You got Alibaba. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically, you know, China's Amazon. It's incredible when all of the top companies of the world are really technology and software companies. And the thing to recognize from that isn't that it means the principles that we talk about in this domain, you know, in DevOps and DevSecOps, is all about software. Instead, it means software is driving the global economy. And so the improvements that we see going in are going in very rapidly, because it's in an incredibly challenging competitive market space where economic giants are duking it out for that next, you know, $100 billion windfall. That's really having a transformative effect, and you see it in the market itself. And so our question should be, these guys are clearly winning. What are they doing that we can learn from and apply to our work, such that when we go into that battle space, we're prepared to win as well? A simple example of that is when you look at the US economy. This is a 10-year span. When you look at what's happened in the retail domain, Amazon's increased almost 2,000%, and the next best performer is Walmart with a 2% increase. Some of these companies are out of business now. And what's interesting is more and more companies are on the verge of going out of business as we transform the way value is delivered to end users and customers. And so the thing I wanted to convey into our domain is, so what does this mean to us? You know, how does it fit? We see it characterized as how we deliver capability to our warfighter. And the DoD leadership talks about working at speeds that get inside the adversary's OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, and act process. The faster that we can build capability and respond to real world conditions, whether that's in a tactical domain or whether that's in a cyber domain, These are the things that are going to give us the advantage. And so moving away from timelines that operate in multiple years of delivering value to something that gets us into the weeks, days, or hours of delivering value is really where we need to be thinking. And hopefully that becomes apparent. There's an interesting principle here that I did want to highlight. It's kind of reflective of what you saw in that global economy metrics earlier. There is this idea of ages that are often put forward. You have the the industrial age, the age of oil and mass production. There are multiple economists who have looked at what's going on, and they believe that we're in a transitional period where the foundations of the economy, the global economy, the ability to generate wealth, is shifting substantially into a new age. And it's really interesting whenever you think about it in those terms, and I'll provide some information that will in turn provide more references later. But when you look at what's happening in the world around us, and you kind of step back and look at the macroeconomics of it all, it's pretty straightforward to start realizing the world is truly shifting. And the question is, how do we fit into that shift? What do we learn from it, and how do we apply it? You'll often hear the term the FANGs, the Facebooks, Apples, Amazons, Netflix, and Googles of the world. These are the companies that kind of spearhead and kicked off this transition. Most of these companies build and provide services that are pure digital in nature often, or even in some instances are completely free. And you really have to start rethinking what the business model looks like. Facebook's business model isn't a monthly subscription to get access to your feed, right? It's you become the customer. That's the Google thing. You are the product, not what they provide. And there's other really great information about the implications of that. MIT is doing some really great and interesting work around the question of artificial intelligence in this domain. And all of these companies are actually pretty deep in how to manage and apply that. I'd encourage you to take some time to look at that aspect of what that means, not only for things like personal privacy and how you fit into the world and what services you consider and use, but what is it going to do to the economy, and how do we interact, almost as a society going forward in that new world? It's an interesting subject. So this is a broader view to put it in context, going back to the Industrial Revolution. We kind of went from the bespoke creator to factory systems between 1793 and 1801. From there, we transitioned to the age of steam and railways. From there, we went to the age of steel and heavy engineering. For those of you in our industry who deal with program management, you'll be happy to learn the source of your discipline was Frederick Taylor, known as Taylorism. All your earned value is based on his scientific management philosophies. You'll also be happy to hear that it's well over 100 years old and has barely changed in that time, from what I can tell. We went from there into the world of kind of oil and mass production, is what they call it here. And this is where you went from Taylorism, which is what are my tasks and am I on schedule, the age of stopwatches and on factory floors, into Fordism, the creation of the assembly line and the streamlined creation of product and the specialization of those who create that product. It was an interesting and very transformative element of the economy. But what's incredible about it to me is the economic impact, think of it in terms of the price of goods and the impact that this had. You know, Henry Ford was able to sell a car brand new off the line for a small fraction of what all of the competitors could do, and sold so many of his Model T that there were almost no other, substantial market share from anyone else in the country. The proposition put forward is that we're actually transitioning into that new age, the age of software and digital. And we don't know that we're there yet. It's sort of one of those things that you capture retrospectively. But there's some really interesting research that's been done. Carlotta Perez, that's put there on the chart, is an economist who has some interesting papers on the subject. But the whole point of this is to just recognize that we could be at something that's truly transformative, not just within our industry, but within a global economy. So when I think about, yeah.
So on that previous slide where they're talking about the turning points and stuff, did they talk at all about like what kind of defines or what kind of drives the end of a turning point? Like if you're looking through those, there's like 8 years and some of that, and like the last one that we're in right now, that nearly 20 years long at this point, where all the other ones were anywhere from 2 years to like 10 years or something.
Right. I think I'm trying to remember the details of the material, but when I think about it, what comes to mind is the idea of basically return on investment. Maybe you can think of it like a learning curve or an adoption curve. So there's this period of time where there's some focused innovation and it starts delivering real value, but for that to proliferate and start truly producing wealth takes a period of time to adapt, to adopt, to mature, and then to scale. And so I think those are the key aspects that I look at. I think about it in the context of the kind of systems and programs that we work in, for the defense industry. And I think of it like any sort of transformation. We have a lot of teams going through agile transformations right now. And I've seen it program after program where everything kind of slows down for a while. And all the zealots tell you, how you're going to be so much faster and be so much greater and all that. But that's only true after maybe 12 to 18 months you start seeing that return. So there's this hump that you have to overcome before you start actually achieving the returns on the back end. Mm-hmm. I think some of that transition is built around discovering how to overcome that hump in a new context with new solutions and new ways of thinking.
Yep. Okay.
So that's my perspective on it based on my research and experience. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any thoughts on the subject?
I keep coming back to the word culture and adoption.
Yeah, there's an interesting aspect of that. We're in a weird world where people are afforded the luxury of being obstinate and not being willing to change. I think in the commercial world where it's depending on the domain you're in, it's how much, what have you done for me lately? Lately being, in the last few days kind of mentality, then there's a different kind of pressure. And if I can make a change to the way I do something that can conceivably save, 1 cent per transaction. Well, when you're dealing with 100 million transactions per day, or 5 billion transactions per day, depending on who you are, the economics of that are staggering. And the only question is, why didn't you do it sooner? So there's a different incentive structure to really to be more aggressive and adopt these practices differently. And I think it results in a culture that is in the right context is more accepting of innovation, but also rejects stagnancy much more than we see in our domain.
Yeah, there's kind of an official barrier to entry in a lot of the DoD space, or a lot of just the government space in general. And so that isolation allows companies to be a bit more complacent in the way that they adopt these types of practices and stuff.
Yeah, agreed. So as we think about, how do we employ this in our domains, I would ask us to stand back and sort of reconsider what and how you deliver. This used to say deliver value, but I didn't want to be overly prescriptive, because value is different to different customers. We do build systems, but we are not Henry Ford. We're not punching out tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Model Ts. We're certainly not Coca-Cola making, hundreds of millions of cans of soda, in a cycle. We tend to build a thing, and then we tend to manage and evolve that thing. And so when you ask, what is it that your work contributes to? What is it that the cost that our customers allocate to our teams and our programs? I really see it as more of a they're contributing for the evolution of that product. And the faster we can work those baseline changes, the more we can optimize our processes to quickly, more affordably deliver changes with great confidence, the better off we are and the happier our customers are. And for us, we have to recognize this isn't just about, the fallacy of water scrum fall. This isn't just about a group of software engineers, these nerds sitting down there with their Jolt Cola, hammering out code. It's about the total value stream. It's about how quickly can I get a requirement fleshed out? How quickly can I spec a test? How quickly can I get it implemented? How quickly can I create a deployable package with objective evidence to show that it behaves as expected for that required or desired outcome? And then how quickly can I get it out of our factory and into the real world, providing real value to the end user? When you step back and think of what does my change process truly look like, you start to recognize that we don't follow lean principles at all. And we really have to embrace those. These lean principles do not come out of the software world. These come out of manufacturing. And the key ones, I just want to highlight some of them here. Understand your product and make sure you understand the value that product delivers. That's so important. And we often generalize things. We talk about grand, glorious, quote unquote, capabilities, but the more precision we can incorporate into the exquisite value that we're trying to achieve, and the more uncertainty we can wring out of that value statement, the more effective our change process can be. Our factory is fundamentally people and tools. We've got great tools, but you can't ignore the people piece of that. And the more uncertainty you put in that, in the people aspect of the system, the more impediments that you're going to hit. Now, that's not to say you wouldn't over specify. You need to trust the people. But if you can't explain the outcome you're trying to achieve, they can't apply their skill and creativity to achieve that outcome. And then I did want to highlight the make value flow without interruptions. We see instances where product teams can fix a bug in minutes, right? In minutes. And then it goes to the next step in the process, and it waits for hours or days before somebody shows up to sign the right piece of paper or gives the right review. or provides the necessary authorization. That is an absolute interruption in that value flow. And we've got to be thinking about how we construct not only our processes and our tools, but enable our people to complete that delivery of value all the way to the end customer. That's really hard in our world and in the culture that we have, where everybody and their mother thinks that their job is to sit at the end and grade your paper. We've got to find a way to shift that around. Can you imagine Henry Ford standing at the end of the production line and personally reviewing every car that came off? They would not make many cars. We've got to get out of that mindset. So what is it that we actually do and deliver? I really like this characterization of work, the 4 types of work. This is targeted at software delivery. I think you can generalize it to some extent, but there's basically 4 things. You have features, I think we're all familiar with. This is new, a new capability, a new function that your product can deliver. Defects, these are, errors or issues that you need to go in and correct. Risks, this is generally where security falls, or items that create impacts to availability, for example. And then, or abilities in general, maybe scalability. And then you have debts. So debts should be considered the things that prevent you from accelerating. And so we often, due to whatever pressures or constraints, cut a corner here or there, do something a certain way that we know isn't optimum. And as long as it doesn't slow us down in the future, it's fine. But when we often pile these shortcuts on top of each other, we create this untenable environment where we fundamentally can barely move forward. There's some really great material that I'll reference that talks about this, but we often ignore the debts that we built up in our system, and overcoming those debts is absolutely critical to achieving the speed and the acceleration that we need to be successful. And this is just kind of a pictorial depiction of that flow and some things that you can measure with your teams to really understand that. Again, this is focused on software, but I think you can apply this to the creation of most product or value. Time starts with a need, and that's where we would characterize lead time. Someone makes a request of us, or someone identifies a defect. It takes time to characterize and approve that for actual work. Once it's approved and work begins, that's flow time. Flow time starts there. And then, just like you would do in any lean process, you want to understand what's my active time and what's my waiting time. And I think it's probably disturbing if you were to go back and look at most of our programs and most of our systems, how often we have items sitting in that waiting time for any myriad of reasons, but all of that waiting time is waste, and our objective should be to eliminate that waiting time wherever possible. And if we can measure it, then once we measure it, we can take action against it. And that's really the key thing that we should be focusing on, is understanding. Think of it like your production line. If the blue is when your production line is working, and the white is when you shut it down, you're not going to be effective in the marketplace. You're not going to be able to meet demand of your product if your line is literally not moving, for half of the time. Let me ask a general question. Has anyone ever worked in a real factory before? Like on the line? Nobody? Nobody wants to admit it?
Oh, I have. I was a picker, and I packed boxes.
Oh yeah? One of my first jobs was making ladies' shoes. So I worked I worked on the line, and we would, you know, whether it was the glue curing station or the leather forming station, you know, you would sit there all day long doing the exact same thing over and over again. And your number one job was to not get behind. Anytime you got behind or something broke that line, all hell broke loose. And it's an interesting environment to work in, because nobody wants to slow down and wait. In fact, most people, I did in that environment, get paid by the piece. You get your minimum wage, obviously, but if you want to make real money, you got to work so fast that the piece count that you work through is high enough to justify you getting something better than minimum wage. And it's all about ensuring total flow, continuous motion, and no waiting time. So you've seen these before. These are kind of old metrics, but I just wanted to bring them up again because the outcomes are real. They are measured. They are reported. These comes from the DevSecOps report. And often we focus on things like more frequent deployments, faster lead time, lower change failure rate, and those are all really great indicators of productivity and quality. But the things I wanted to highlight in this context were the fact that you're twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals when you apply the DevSecOps principles to what you're trying to do. So imagine in our world, if what we're doing, if we have goals to deliver a capability in our system, you know, in a year, we should be able to cut that in half. When you realize that the costs of our programs are driven by labor and materials, and mostly labor, you realize the cost implications of that kind of speed are earth-shattering in this domain. And so we just have to recognize the faster we can work, you know, the more value we can deliver to the customer. It is the meaning of affordability. When we see the Undersecretary of Defense come and say, what I want is speed, speed, and speed, the inherent secondary effect of that is affordability, affordability, affordability. Now, oftentimes people think that means, oh my God, my job's at risk. But I don't see that at all, because congressional budgeting isn't going down. It simply gives us the ability to give more to our end users. So I think the opportunities are absolutely enormous. So anyway, those are the kind of the key metric and summary I wanted to highlight in terms of the measured outcomes. A lot of this material I've gone over today comes out of a book called Project to Product by Mick Kirsten. He actually does a really good review at this at last year's DevOps Enterprise Summit. He did a talk, and I stole most of the charts in this deck from his talk. He's much more knowledgeable on the subject than I am, and so you can see the YouTube link down there in the bottom if you would like to go review his presentation. I found it incredibly informative, and I would say his book was eye-opening at a minimum, to put some of these things that we're trying to do in a specific context of the economic principles that underlay them. And then his book actually goes a step further, and he talks you through a visit to the BMW factory in Leipzig, Germany, where you see the lean principles in action in a true manufacturing facility, and you can make the associations between what they're doing in that production facility and what those principles applied to our domain should look like. It's really, really a great read. So that's all I had for today. I do want to open it up and maybe get some feedback, get some discussion on what do you see as the key drivers for DevSecOps? Do you think it's the economy, the economic impacts and outcomes? Do you think it's something different that we should be looking at, or maybe even drilling into for another meetup?
So I've been struggling for a while, and I would love other people's feedback on this, with the requirements forced upon government acquisition through the federal acquisition requirement, and the transition to engaging the customer more closely as part of DevOps or DevSecOps all along the way, and how you get to a contract that makes sense and allows that flexibility to build the actual product that's needed rather than the product that was defined originally.
Yeah. Has anybody got any thoughts or experience on that?
So a lot of it recently has been, they've been trying to overcome some of that by going more and more to the OTAs, right? Which allows you to be a little more flexible in a lot of the way that works. I think it often also comes down to finding a government contracting officer that's willing to look at the FAR and be creative in meeting the intent of it, without necessarily, breaking it in any way, shape, or form. Like that's where the guy from UCIS, Schwartz, right? He had a really good contracting officer that knew the FAR inside and out, and allowed them to, change the way that they purchased and bought essentially capability from, or bought capacity from companies, and they didn't have to necessarily have it specified out of, your full set of requirements up front and do all these big design reviews and such. So
Yeah, I very much agree. I see the OTA stuff happening quite often now. The Army's doing a lot of it. And the only thing I would add to that is I do see new guidance coming out of the Air Force, and have seen for probably a year and a half now, where the Undersecretary for Acquisition, for example, is providing specific direction to contracting officers and how they should construct and procure systems going forward. And it is substantially different than what we've seen in the past.
I think we could also make improvements if we looked at, breaking apart or looking at applying different rules or expectations when you're talking about software versus, big physical systems, right? I mean, oftentimes when you have a big physical system, they apply the same approach for the way that they build and acquire the physical systems when you're, the steel and concrete and all that sort of stuff, as they do to the software. And those are two fundamentally different domains, and you should be able to acquire those differently.
Sorry, Sean.
Oh, you're fine.
I'm also watching the opposite happen as well, where people who are, acquiring a whole system that maybe does have concrete associated with it, or boosters, or name your thing, have gone fully the other way, and they're expected to apply agile methods to, some very physical widget that's only complete and testable when it's full. There is no minimum viable product for a rocket booster that is short of a rocket booster, as an example.
Well, let me challenge that idea. And it gets into, we hear a lot about this idea of digital transformation, right? It's joined the buzzword bingo card. But I think it's worth understanding what that means in practical terms, because I think it addresses some of at least may address some of the concerns you mentioned there. And I'll give you the example outside of our domain that I hope resonates with you. So I like cars, and I like racing, and I watch Formula One and all the drama and all the drivers and all that stuff, and it's its own little soap opera, and I've fallen in love with it, right? But part of what I love about it is that it's a incredibly technical sport. And the engineers that contribute to the design, development, testing of the cars probably have as much or more impact on outcomes than these, you know, bazillionaire drivers themselves. And when you look at a team like Mercedes, you know, what makes this team successful? If you don't know, Mercedes has what, 6 world championships in a row. They are by far the highest performing team in F1, bar none. I mean, by a margin. And you ask yourself, well, how do they do this? Do they build 100,000 cars and test them all? Absolutely not. They have gone through their own digital transformation. They build 100,000 digital cars, and they have really good computational fluid dynamics that help them understand what a small tweak to this aspect of the bodywork or this corner of the wing will do to the downforce of their car at speed on track. And so while they build, you know, 100,000 digital cars, in the real world, they only ever build maybe 6 actual cars. The trick is, do I have the technology in place to evaluate the digital representation of my model that conveys into the realization of the physical object and achieves the expected outcomes? I think that's our real challenge is, you know, if we're building, you know, the next jet fighter, that's great. Build a digital fighter. What does your digital fighter look like? What missions are you going to have it fly, and how do you evaluate that digital fighter's performance? How can I build 100 million digital fighters, fly 500 million sorties, and then how do I analyze the outcomes? And then how do I make incremental changes to that digital fighter, you know, as I go, and understand that the change I'm making is having the desired outcome that I want, such that whenever I translate that digital you know, fighter to a no kidding, you know, Lord knows what they're made out of these days, titanium rocket ship, that it is going to give me the results that I expect. That's kind of, I hope that made sense, but I see that digital transformation aspect being misunderstood or misapplied in our domain. And the idea that, oh, you know, I build an airplane, or I build a rocket, or I build a whatever, I build a boat or a submarine, means none of this applies to me. I completely reject that philosophy. I think it applies to you more, but it's not as, I can't just go download the open source stuff to do CFD for hypersonic aircraft. You know, it doesn't exist. I might have to create that. I might have to invent it.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where in that case where you need to apply those agile principles to the way that you're building that model that you're going to be using to build that physical model, but too often those get applied lockstep in that same big phase gated approach. So,
Yeah.
so the other thing that would kind of tie into what you're talking about, JD, in the physical or in the modeling of the physical world is like, that was one of the big changes that Toyota introduced compared to like GM and a lot of the American automakers. Was like the American automakers, they spent a lot of time doing a clay model or other drawing models, because creating their molds or their forms that they would use to create the actual physical parts was hugely expensive for them. And Toyota flipped that around, where they really focused on making it much cheaper to create and iterate on those physical forms or those physical models, that they could do a little bit of modeling or do a little bit of analysis and then create a new physical implementation to check it out. And if it wasn't quite right, then it was cheaper for them to be able to continue to, to do a new iteration through that. So I think it ties both aspects of it, of, focusing on how do I do that digital modeling of that physical device, and, do a lot of it really fast, but then also look at, when I do go to make that change into a physical manifestation, how do I do that in a way that I can replicate and iterate through in a fast way as well? So.
Yeah. All right. Karen, I hope you got some value from that kind of different perspective.
No, I got value from it. Yeah, I've been struggling with the two questions that are sort of coupled just because of my prior experience being a core or COTAR or whatever they were called in the day back on my assignment in DC.
Yeah. Yeah, none of it's easy. That's what I think there's a bit of problem in what we see going on in the broader economy and sometimes in the publications. Amazon did magic and now it's open source, and why aren't you doing it? It is not that easy. Because you have to understand your problem first and then tailor everything into that domain and then truly prove that it works. That's really difficult.
Yeah, because that's what Amazon did. They did it in the context of their domain that they were specifically trying to solve, right?
Yep.
And so kind of getting back to what you talked about earlier was it's really understanding your value stream and now understanding those concepts and how do I apply those concepts in the best way within my specific domain or my specific context. And that takes a little bit of time to work through that and iterate through that.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back to this turning point chart because it kind of spawned an idea, and it's something that I'm seeing a lot of right now. As the DoD really starts, and I would argue they're just starting to get serious about things like cloud technologies. I see people all over the place, multiple companies. I see small businesses talk about what they can do in this domain. Going to tell you that they will build you a cloud. And I don't care who you are, building a cloud is really stinking hard. Yes, there's open source stuff. Yes, there's commodity hardware you can get. Yes. But that's not the value proposition of the cloud. The value proposition is I can get all that stuff for a fraction of the price from someone who knows how to manage it, and I don't have to anymore.
Right.
And it's really strange to me that part of coming through this curve and this particular turning point, I think, is commoditizing things at a rate that almost make them unachievable for others in the marketplace. To have someone new break into the cloud services domain in the commercial industry today and actually try to compete against Amazon or Microsoft or Google, to me, what investor in the world would show up with money to do that? I just don't see it happening. But in the defense industry, in the defense industry, we have people coming out of the woodworks talking about how they're going to build their own cloud. It is mind-boggling to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the meetup. I know it's virtual and it's not as much fun as it is in person. It does give us the opportunity to bring in some, friends from across the country, and I certainly want to thank those of you who took some time out, from across the country to join us. Thank you so much for that. Always welcome any feedback or ideas for next time. I do intend to be as part of the virtual DevOps for Defense week after next. So I will probably plan to do sort of JD's summary of DevOps Enterprise Summit next month. I'm still on the fence of whether I stay pure virtual or go to a hybrid. If you have thoughts or interests or think people would be interested in getting back in person and feel safe doing it, let me know. The email's down there. And of course, if you think you would like to join the DevOps Enterprise Summit this year and would like your 50% off code, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to share it with you. That's all I had, and thank you.